Right, I would also like to say, before I start, I want to try and make my presentation as dementia-friendly as possible, in the spirit of dementia friendliness. Now, people with dementia tell us that one of the things that gets on their nerves at meetings is when they're told to, oh, hold that thought, you know, by people who probably haven't got a great grasp of what it actually means to have dementia. So I would like to extend an invitation to anyone in the audience who has a diagnosis of dementia or is struggling with their memory. If you have a question or a comment, shout it right out, and I will bring the mic to you so you can be heard. So don't hold that thought. Now, I'm going to speak about the approach that we've been taking in the UK, some of the work that we've been doing. And there are some really, really broad similarities, I think, with what's been happening in Australia. And I've got to really start by commending the quality of the materials that I've seen in the short time that I've been here. Really, really powerful stuff. Very simply presented, and I think it's going to be really, really, it's a really, really good start to the process of creating communities in which are better places for people with dementia to live. I also want to echo Tom's comments about the dangers of the way that the media deal with research. Now, as Mary said, I managed the National Alzheimer's Helpline for 8 years, and every morning on my way to work, I'd look at a newspaper, because this was before they invented the internet, and I'd look at the red tops, especially as the kind of the mass media, and every time I saw a big story about breakthrough for this, cure for that, I knew that by the time I got into work, there'd be half a dozen messages from people whose hearts were full of hope, and which I knew I would have to break their hearts every time I called. So my plea to those of you who come across these kind of stories, make sure that you contact Alzheimer's Association, because there you will get the real skinny, as we call it in the UK. You'll get the facts about what these stories actually mean. I mean, ultimately, everyone hopes that we will find a cure for, say, Alzheimer's disease. But don't forget, obviously, that Alzheimer's is one of only maybe up to 400 different conditions that can cause dementia. So, we're really keen also to promote research and efforts into supporting people with dementia to live well. Because I think, we are never actually going to have a cure for all forms of dementia. And hey, guess what? If we can create societies and communities which are better places for people with dementia to live in, we also make those communities and societies better for everyone else at the same time. So this is not just about people with dementia, it's about all of us. I've got a challenge for those of you in the audience who don't have dementia. I want you to do something for me. I want you, first of all, to think about a standard big service for people with dementia. Now, maybe you've got one in your neighbourhood. Maybe you haven't, maybe you visited one. But I just want you to think about that service for a moment. What it looks like if you were to go there. What sort of things would you be seeing? What sort of things would you be hearing while you're sitting there? And you probably will be sitting there, by the way, not standing. What sort of things are you smelling while you're there? How does it feel to be in this service? I'd now like you to imagine that tomorrow morning you go along to see your GP, because you've been having a few just really mild problems with your memory. You've been forgetting the odd thing. You've been finding a few things more difficult. Maybe some friends or family have said, I'm going to get that checked out. So you're there at your GP's, and the GP says, look, I'm really sorry to tell you that you have the early symptoms, the very early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. How many of you are going to walk out of your doctor's surgery and make a beeline for that dementia service that you have in your mind? I live in dread that someone's going to put their hand up and say, me! Now, I've been using that same opening for my presentations about dementia-friendly communities for about 4 years now, and not one person yet has put their hand up to say that they want to go to that dementia service. And I'm not surprised by that, because in the work that we've done with people with dementia tell us that they want to carry on doing the same things that they've always done. The stuff of life, you know, going down to the cafe for a coffee, going to the shop, going to the pub, getting on the bus, carrying on working, carrying on volunteering, carrying on bringing up kids and grandkids, the stuff of life, not going to that big dementia service. Now, of course, there will always be a need for specialist provision for people with dementia at various stages in their lives. But the vast majority of time, people with dementia are going to be in our communities. When you get dementia, when I get dementia, which I probably will, given my family background and the fact that I've had a head injury and all of those things add up to me, I will probably get dementia. I do not want to go to a day centre. Actually, I probably don't want to go into a care home either. But I'll come into that a little bit later. I want to carry on doing the same stuff that I do. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about creating communities that are good places to have dementia in. It's pure self-interest to a great extent. Now, before I go any further, I should say that I've got some reservations about the use of the word dementia-friendly. And they're kind of encapsulated a little bit by this picture of Lady Bountiful, helping the poor little cripple across the road. You see, there's something about the word dementia-friendly for me, which employs the language of beneficence, the language of largesse, as if somehow people with dementia should be grateful that we're not discriminating against them in the way that we provide services, in the way that we run our communities. And I've been thinking a lot recently, I have others both in Australia and in the UK, about similarities with the disability movement in the 1970s and 80s. And certainly in the UK, in Australia and in America, it was in the 1970s that people with physical disabilities started to question the status quo. Now at the time, the status quo around disability was very much following what's often referred to as the medical model. In other words, you're the problem because your legs don't work. So people with disabilities were sitting out and thinking, I'm the problem because my legs don't work. Some people then started to say, well, you know, really? Really? Is that all it is? Then people started to think about something called the social model of disability, which says, okay, fair dues, my legs don't work, but also I experience a lot of discrimination, a lot of stigma. And you know, many of you will be familiar with the levels of stigma that people with dementia and their carers face. Basically, people clear off. I mean, I've heard so many people say, when I got my diagnosis, or when my wife or my husband got their diagnosis, people would cross over the street rather than talk to us. Because they're scared, because they don't know what to say, because they think, as Graham said in the video, because they assume that all people with dementia are automatically just staring off into space. Everyone with dementia's got communication problems. Everyone with dementia has got behavioural problems, is probably doubly incontinent, wanders, is aggressive. We launched some films a few years ago that we've made with people with dementia, and at the launch I was chatting with a really senior person from adult social care from the local council, and she said, oh, they're great films, Steve, but to be honest, I think they're a bit dishonest. And I said, oh, why is that? He said, well, you didn't show them being aggressive. I said, excuse me? He said, you didn't show them being aggressive. I said, well, that's because they weren't aggressive. She said, oh, don't you know anything about dementia? Okay. I had to be escorted away from that particular conversation. You know. And of course, there's no denying the huge impact that dementia has on people's lives. But this image that we have, that again is portrayed partly by the media, of all people with dementia being people with very high support needs, is very, very corrosive. If I see one more media story that has the only picture that goes with it is a picture of a pair of wrinkly hands, you know, I think I'm going to explode. So the social model of disability says, okay, legs don't work, that's fine, but also we need to think about stigma. We need to think about addressing that. We need to think about, you know, what the environment is like. And there's a lot that we can do. As we'll see in a moment, there's a lot we can do to make the environment a much, much easier place for people with dementia. And there's a lot that we can do as organisations to provide our services in a way which don't unfairly discriminate against people with dementia. Let me give you an example. My father had dementia, and he was a greedy bugger, because he not only had Alzheimer's disease, he had Korsakoff syndrome as well, and multi-infarct dementia. Now, Korsakoff's, as you may know, is caused by alcoholism. My dad was an alcoholic for about the last 15 years of his life. But he was a pretty fit guy, and the main thing that kept him fit was swimming. He loved it. Up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. Now, at the local swimming pool, it was great because they had a ramp for people who used wheelchairs, so you could get in. They had a hearing induction loop, although not a waterproof one, you know, for people who were hearing impaired. So anyway, that was all fine. Dad was going to the pool. But one day they changed their opening hours because they were having different classes and yada, yada, yada. And they sent him this leaflet about the change of opening hours. Guess what? He couldn't understand it. It was so poorly written. It didn't use plain English. It was badly laid out. So he took it along to reception and said, look, I'm really sorry. And basically they sort of said to him, what, you stupid or something? He stopped going swimming as a result of that, and he then became quite unfit. He basically sat on his backside watching sports, drinking ale, got really depressed, really big downward spiral, and he probably died a good 5-10 years before he actually needed to, because, you know, it made it, you know, he then got diabetes, you know, blah, 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 which is what actually killed him in the end rather than the dementia. Now, if he'd gone along to that swimming pool and been unable to get in because he couldn't get his wheelchair up the stairs, we'd have been crying civil rights issue, wouldn't we? And certainly disabled people would have been saying, oh, this is not on, mate, you know, I need to get into the pool. That's why we're trying to change the narrative about dementia in the UK, to get, you know, to support people to start thinking about their dementia in terms of a disability. And when we start thinking about dementia as a disability, we start thinking about rights. And when we start thinking about rights, that gives a whole new narrative to people with dementia. Whereas when we did some research about 5 years ago, we spoke to a lot of people with dementia, and we said, what are your barriers? What are the barriers that are stopping you getting engaged in your community? Now, before I tell you the response, imagine we'd done that with a group of young wheelchair users. We'd have had stuff like, oh, the bloody bar, I can't get on the bus, you know, the other. Not one person with dementia that we spoke to quoted anything other than, well, it's my dementia, which shows, you know, how far we've got to come. But in the time between then and now, we are starting to see people with dementia telling a different story about dementia, one that speaks of rights, but also one that speaks of hope. Now, hope's a funny word when we apply it to dementia, right? Because there's no cure. People will not get better from their dementia. That does not mean they cannot get better. Does that make sense? There is not necessarily a strong correlation between the level of cognitive impairment and the quality of life of that person. Now, that might sound like a counterintuitive thing to say, especially for those of you who've been carers. But I maintain very strongly that people, even with advanced dementia, can enjoy quality of life. And I'm going to give you an example of that, just one example from my experience. You may have your own experiences that inform you about that as well. I was in a care home about a year ago. In the UK, we have some care homes that follow a thing called the Eden Principles. It's also quite big in Australia as well. I'm an Eden associate in the UK, among other things. Now, in this particular care home, there was a big conservatory, and there was a very elderly lady, she's probably in her 90s, and she was sat in a chair, and on her lap was this scruffy old cat, flea-ridden kind of moggy. And she was just stroking it like that. And you could hear it purring from outside the conservatory. And as I stood there chatting to one of the members of staff, another old fella he went by on what are those four-wheeled things called? Stroller? Walker? Yeah, walking frame. And as he saw the one with the cat, he said very loudly, "I want that." And I thought, oh, God, here we go. And I was getting ready for my kind of de-escalation, process. And he went towards her, and I thought he's gonna grab the cat, and there's gonna be fireworks, He went towards her. The cat then jumped off. He fell to his knees, put his head on her lap, and she started to stroke his head. Now, you see, for me, there's a woman who has got quality of life. Because you can't extend care and compassion to another human being unless you have within you that spark of quality. The problem is we spend so much time measuring people with dementia in terms of what they can't do, the mini mental state exam, other cognition tests. We forget to measure people with dementia by what they can do. And that's why we're failing. That's why we think it's all about decay, decline, disease, depression, and lots of other things beginning with D. We're looking in the wrong place for the spark of humanity, and we are failing people with dementia. We are failing ourselves because of that. I've gone off at a massive tangent. I do that. I do apologise. Someone said to me before I came in, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. And I thought to myself, so am I. Because I never really know what's next. Oh, yes. So our basic concepts of what a friendly dementia community looks like in the UK are pretty much the same as yours in Oz. When we asked people with dementia what they thought a dementia-friendly community was like, this is what they said. They said, it's a good place to live with dementia. This stuff is not PhD level, really, is it? It's a place where it's good to live, where you can find your way about, you can orient yourself, where you feel safe, where you can use the local stuff like shops and transport and whatnot, where you can keep your social networks. And that's been when I've been doing all the media stuff, people have been saying, so what's your message to Joe Public, Steve? And my message is, if you know someone with dementia, someone who's got a diagnosis, do not walk away from them. Give them a fair go. And again, because of this assumption that people get, that as soon as you get your diagnosis, you're staring off into space. And we saw from those three people in that video that really does not have to be the case. And it's a community where other people know about dementia and can support you if you need support. And plenty of people with dementia, especially now with those early diagnoses, don't actually need much at all in the way of support, other than an understanding of the need to be with people and to be there for people to help them carry on their lives. Okay. Here's a bit of the context of the UK. And we brought, our figures for dementia are really similar to yours in terms of prevalence, and in terms of the fact that it's going to get a lot bigger. It's not going anywhere in a hurry unless there's suddenly a cure for Alzheimer's disease. Who knows? Who knows? And 2/3 of those people with dementia live in the community. That is increasing, mainly because residential and nursing care is amazingly expensive in the UK. And I'll be honest with you, it's crap. I mean, really, apart from a few really good examples of really high quality care. My father was in the home for the last 6 weeks of his life, mainly because of his chronic diabetes and gangrene. He needed a lot of support. It was really expensive. It was really high end. It was still crap.
Same in Australia.
Yeah. So increasingly people with dementia want to stay at home and need to stay at home, and actually, who can blame them? Now, we've got a Prime Minister challenge on dementia. I want to make a point, and I was really flattered that you've implied that we were responsible for the Prime Minister choosing dementia. I think I would prefer to think of it as a correlation rather than a causality. We were certainly doing a lot of the early work around dementia-friendly communities. And I have to say, when we started our research, we did the usual Googling, and most of the really groundbreaking work around dementia-friendly communities was done in Australia, more than 10 years ago. then it seemed to go quiet for a bit, and then we kind of picked up on that, and now I'm here. You know, we've gone full circle, eh? So I'll come on to the Prime Minister's Challenge a bit later. It's been a huge benefit, but there are significant dangers in it, which I'll touch on in a moment. One of the things that has happened as a result of that has been the production of a lot of local dementia action alliances, again, which I'll tell you a little bit about. Now, what are the other drivers? You know, why are we thinking about dementia-friendly communities in the UK? More people with dementia getting diagnosed earlier. When I first started working at the Alzheimer Society, people got their diagnosis very, very late in the disease process, most usually. Not anymore. Most people are now getting diagnosed. I'm not allowed to say lately, apparently. I'm meant to say timely in the UK. The language subtly changed. And perhaps, you know, for obvious reasons. But yeah, early diagnosis. So people with dementia have got higher expectations, not least because we're now looking at baby boomers. My parents' generation wouldn't say boo to a goose. My parents certainly wouldn't, especially a doctor. You know, what a doctor says is absolutely sacrosanct. You wouldn't challenge it. Baby boomers are different. You know, I'm sort of part of the tail end of baby boomer generation. Grew up in the 60s and 70s. We lived and breathed the language of rights. We have this much stronger sense of entitlement, for better or worse. And that means we are going to be much more snotty than our parents' generation. I'm not going to put up with the same kind of stuff that my dad put up with. And there will be lots of people like me. And people don't want to live their lives in health and social care. You know, most of the time, people with dementia that we work with, when we say, you know, do you want to make a film about dementia? People say, oh, I'm so bored. I am so bored of talking about dementia. Dementia this, dementia that, and, you know, people most of the time are actually living their lives. And again, which is why communities that support people to do that. It's not just about dementia. We've also got this thing called austerity, apparently. And back in the UK, some people are more austere than others. It didn't kind of help, really, that the birth of dementia-friendly communities came about as part of a now discredited political initiative that was called the Big Society. And this was David Cameron saying, you know, we need to stop paying for stuff through taxation and get communities to do it all, basically, was the political message. And there was a certain irony in that, because it was the same party that effectively dismantled many of our communities in the 1980s. Statements from Margaret Thatcher like, there is no such thing as community. And now apparently there is again. Now we want it to pay for stuff. Anyway, it was unfortunate that the main architect of Big Society was a guy who looked identical to me. Same hair, same facial structure, same build. I'm Steve Milton, he's Steve Hilton, right? So whenever I stood up to speak about dementia-friendly community, I think it's that bastard Steve Hilton. Okay. The other thing that we've had is we've had businesses suddenly realising, hey, guess what? You know, not all people with dementia are skint. Many people with dementia have got some money. Now, if I've got dementia and I come into your supermarket and I can't work out where stuff is and I'm finding the staff unhelpful, guess what? I'll go next door. There's a really strong business case for organisations and businesses to become dementia-friendly, because if you don't, you will lose business. A bit more about the business case. I mean, don't bother about all the detail, but basically, economists estimate that if we delayed the premature admittance to residential and nursing care by a year for 5% of people with dementia, we can save £55 million sterling a year. One of your colleagues at Alzheimer's Association Australia tweeted that she said it was £55 sterling a year. I have to say, actually, our economy isn't that bad. It's actually 55 million. But, you know, I did a bit of fag packet mathematics myself earlier, and I thought, hey, you know, why don't we set the bar a bit higher and try and stop every person with dementia from going into a care home before they need to? What if we could delay premature admittance to care homes for 100% of people with dementia? My fag packet economics say to me that in Australian terms, that's 2 billion Australian dollars per year. Now that's not a bad amount of money to have in your back pocket. I have checked those figures, by the way, and it wasn't actually on the back of a fag packet. I can't write on your fag packets, there's too many pictures on them. Okay, right, quick thing about the Prime Minister's Challenge. And I should say that on the whole, it's been really, really positive. So we've got 63 places in the UK that have committed to becoming dementia friendly. Notice that doesn't say that have become dementia friendly. I would be wary of anywhere that says it is dementia friendly with a full stop behind it, because this is about a process. It's not about a destination. The Alzheimer Society have established a recognition process, as Alzheimer's Association Australia are doing. And that's actually good, because I think this needs to be meaningful. You don't want to get into a situation where, as we've had in the UK, there's been a race to become the first dementia-friendly city, pub, transport provider, strip club, whatever you like. Because what it's ended up with is blokes like me in suits handing oversized checks to other blokes in suits in front of the cameras. And you speak to people with dementia and they say, well, it hasn't changed my life, has it? It's got to be meaningful. So if I have dementia and I travel to a different part of the UK and I see the symbol, I need to know that I can expect a certain level of support. It's got to be meaningful. And that's why your recognition process, I think, is so powerful potentially, because it provides that base level that people are working towards. I'm part of a British Standards Institute working group where we're actually trying to set up British standards for dementia-friendly communities. It is incredibly hard to do that. And there's a big difference between the UK and Australia. In the UK, the work around dementia is done by loads of different organisations. Alzheimer's Society used to be the only one. In the last 10 years, it's blossomed. There are dozens of organisations now, including us, big ones, little ones. And we've all been working on dementia-friendly communities. So we've all produced our own stuff, completely independently of each other, yeah, right? So trying to pull that together into a coherent set of standards is really tough. Now, in Australia, your association is still by far and away the preeminent organisation, and that's meant that you've moved much more quickly in terms and produced something much more coherent. I mean, I don't want to tell you how, we've got more than 63 pages of comments from organisations about the first draft of our standards, and they're trying to get me to consult with people with dementia. Got 63 pages of 10-point notes. Can you imagine? So I think that's a real strength for you. Now, to my mind, one of the most important things about the Prime Minister's Dementia Challenge is that we're trying to create 1 million dementia friends. Now, dementia friends are people who have attended a 45-minute-long awareness-raising session. And here's the good news, it's not about creating experts in dementia, and I'm never quite sure what that means, by the way. The only real experts in dementia are people who have a diagnosis of dementia and their carers. It's about creating people who've just had that stigma taken away from them, who've just had those misunderstandings that stop them staying connected, and are given a few bits of information about how to communicate with people who might be struggling a little bit. That's all it takes. This is not rocket science. And the idea is that by March next year, there will have been 1 million UK citizens who've attended an awareness session. It's actually been rolled out at a relatively inexpensively. And I say it's the most important part because the most important part, we think, and people with dementia tell us, of dementia-friendly community is the people that you have within it. Over and above the environment and over above anything else, it's the people. And I'll tell you something. No, I'll hold that one for a bit later. Okay, moving on. Now, when we work in the UK, innovations in dementia, we look at 5 broad areas. One of the things that we do fairly frequently is we're asked by organisations to come in and help them to become dementia friendly. And at the start of that process, we do an audit. And during that, we focus on 5 areas. It is likely that the British standards are also going to suggest a similar approach to making organisations dementia friendly. It is not a million miles away from the approach that you're also taking in Australia either. And it applies whether you're a huge multinational company or a local chip shop. It also, by the way, applies to individual couples and families living with dementia. You can take the same approach in terms of working out kind of where you're at in terms of your engagement with the community. So the first thing that we look at is the place, obviously. And it's the thing that most people think about when they think about dementia-friendly communities. You know, is your environment, is your local environment easy to find your way around? Is it easy for people with dementia to know where they are and where they're going? We involve people with dementia a lot in what we call walk the patch exercises. So although I've got a relatively broad experience of the issues facing people with dementia, I estimated that in the course of 8 years at Alzheimer's Helpline, I've spoken to around 40,000 people, which gives me a reasonable spread of experience. But I always try, if I can, to take people with dementia with me, because there's nothing like having someone with dementia going into a place. And the way we work is we get them to tell us why they're making the decisions they're making. Why did you turn left there? Why did you turn right? You know, what did you think of that sign? How was that conversation you just had with that person? I think researchers call it the think aloud protocol or something. But it's, you know, basically take someone with dementia, get them to tell you what it's like. You might be surprised. We also obviously look at the written and published information that people produce. Is that accessible? Big advantage you have in Australia is that you tend not to be as up yourselves as we are in the UK when we write stuff. When we write stuff, it's all kind of, you know, lots of kind of curlicues and, you know, this and acronyms, because those of us who are social scientists feel so inadequate that we didn't do a proper science, that we invent lots of long words to make ourselves think that we're proper scientists. Yeah, you tend not to do that quite so much, and compare and contrast the materials that Alzheimer's Association New South Wales have produced, for example, that were launched 2 days ago, with some of the stuff that comes out of the UK. It's really straightforward. We have a saying in the UK, it does what it says on the tin. Now this comes from an advert for Ronseal, which is a boat varnish, and you know, it's boat varnish. So I think the campaign was, it does what it says on the tin. It varnishes your boat. Yeah, which actually was a very kind of Australian approach, I think, but has become a byword in the UK for plain English. And the biggest thing you can do to make your written materials dementia friendly is just use plain English. And you do it pretty well already. You know, and actually that helps everyone, right? I mean, you've probably all encountered information that you really think, what, what? And you have to read it 3 or 4 times. Stick to the plain English. Small changes can make a huge difference to the environment. This is the entrance to a new support service, for older people that I was asked to advise on in the Midlands. Now they've taken a bit of early advice about making sure that they used good signage. You know, use nice big clear signs. While I was inside the building, I saw 3 people approach it, put their hands on the open sign and press, right? 'Cause it looks like a door, doesn't it? Do you know what they then did? They turned around and they walked away. Probably because they felt silly. They felt, because you know what it's like sometimes when you go up, you're going into a building and you can see lots of people inside, and the thing says push, and you're pushing, and actually it should be, and you feel like a, you know. Now if you've got dementia and you've summoned up, or you're a carer, and you've summoned up the courage and confidence to go out and seek help, because this was an advice centre, a new one. You've summoned up the courage, you've got out of your house, you've navigated public transport, you've found the place, your nerves are a jangle, and then that happens. I wouldn't mind betting that those 3 people may have had dementia if they probably went home without the very information and support they needed to help them to live well. My fear is they would probably then start to become even more isolated and go into a bit of a spiral. Now sometimes when I meet with building managers, they say, oh, yet another bloody thing that I've got to take into account. How much is this going to cost? You know, how much does that cost to fix? You pick the sign off the blobs of blue tack, you move it 3 feet to the right, job done. It doesn't need to cost a lot of money. But again, having someone with dementia with you to point out this kind of stuff. These are the words of a person with dementia I did an audit with. The sign on the door says automatic door, but you actually have to push the pad to the left of the door to open it. I assumed all I had to do was stand there and it would open it, and I felt silly when it didn't. A sign on the door saying push the pad with an arrow to open the door would make it clearer. Right? That's happened to me lots of times. An automatic door is one that opens automatically. One you have to press a pad for is not an automatic door. That's why I keep coming back to our slogan, does it do what it says on the tin? That doesn't do what it says on the tin. Luckily, there was a receptionist, really nice receptionist standing nearby who said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, just press the button." And it's great there was a receptionist there because, again, the people are the most important part of a dementia-friendly community. We've got to challenge that stigma and raise awareness. And how good was that video, eh? That was absolutely fantastic, seeing those three. And I met Graham yesterday in Port Macquarie. And he writes songs about dementia. The bloke's a song machine. It's ridiculous. And it was the first time I've ever heard a good song about dementia. Every time I've heard a song about dementia in the past, it's all minor key stuff, really slow. And the lyrics are really cringy. You'd have gone away and cut your throat after listening to that. But Graham's stuff is funny. It's witty. And actually, because I write songs, I also play drums as well, his songs are actually good. He's got I wouldn't call it a classically beautiful voice, but it's an interesting voice. And I'm going to be taking his stuff back to the UK with me. So, people like Graham are really getting out there and challenging stigma. I've got 10 minutes left. I've got to speak much faster now. Right. Now, I will say to those of you who are tasked with raising awareness at a community level, or even within mainstream services, whatever you do, do not rush into paying for training, because there's loads of free stuff available, including online. You've got quite a big course, I think, down in Tasmania. Is it the Massive Open something? That's quite intensive. I'm not suggesting that would be good for community awareness, but again, there's lots of free stuff available. The other thing that you definitely should not do, please, when you're working with mainstream staff and people at community level, don't use training stuff designed for care homes, which most of it is, unless you want to reinforce the very stereotypes and misconceptions about dementia that have brought us here in the first place. Don't use traditional training materials, please. Also think about your own policies in your organisation. What would happen if you developed dementia, or your partner or family member developed dementia? How would your organisation then support you to carry on working? Interesting. Okay, the next thing we look at is networks. Networks have been huge in the UK, most principally in the creation of a National Dementia Action Alliance. Now this is where hundreds of national organisations have signed up. It's a bit pledgy, in that we have to say what we're going to do that year. But then we have to prove it. We have to show every year what we have done to improve our provision for people with dementia. Even better, that national alliance is replicated locally. So we've got loads of local ones, and that's where the real power, that's where it really starts to happen. Where you bring together I'm not going to go through the big list, local government, local businesses, all of these people. Now, if you want to think, if you're forming a local alliance and you think, well, who shall we invite, right? Think about your life. Think about the stuff that you do and what you want to do. Think about all the organisations and people who make that happen, right? So in my case, I go diving. Yes, I do, in the English Channel. We're tough in England. We don't have warm water, and I know some of your water's quite cold. Now, I would want to make sure, for example, that the diving organisation that I'm a member of knows how to continue to support people with early stage dementia to dive. Diving is extremely dangerous, but a diagnosis of dementia should not automatically mean that I have to stop diving. So that's one organisation I'd like to bring on board. But again, think about your life. Shops, transport, local parks, local council, emergency services, police. disaster organisations, all of these have got a role to play. But the biggest and the most important part of your alliance has got to be people with dementia and their carers. I guarantee you one thing: if you don't involve people with dementia and carers, your dementia-friendly community will fail. It will fail. And this is where I come back to talking about our National Dementia Prime Minister's Challenge. The problem with it being driven top-down as opposed to bottom-up is that there's a change of government next year. Sorry, there's an election. Right. Whoops. Although there might not be an election, if Scotland leaves, there ain't going to be an election. But if there's a change of government, the Prime Minister's Challenge has been great, but there's no denying that there was a politically strategic rationale for doing it that will almost certainly be overturned if a new government comes in. Now that means that when it's top-driven, as soon as it stops being top-driven, we've got problems, which is why at the moment in the UK we are trying to make damn sure that at grassroots level people with dementia and carers are in there kicking butt. Because as long as you've got it being driven from the grassroots up, and yours is much more grassroots up than ours is, and so much the stronger for it. I should say the other things you've really got going for you. Now this is where I get taken outside and lynched for making crude cultural assumptions, okay? Those of you that have been to London especially will recognise that Londoners would rather bite off their own feet than make eye contact with each other, right? Let alone talk to each other. So there I am, right, walking around Sydney when I arrived. I had people going, right, what's talking to me? No, all right, I'm making massive, generalisations there, But, that's what separates us from the animals, of course, our ability to generalise. It's what, helped us to survive. It's all about people. It's all about communicating. It's about friendliness. And generally speaking, Australian people are more friendly at a certain level than British people. And in England, the further south you go, the worse it gets. My wife, who's from the north, says, and she's right, the further north you go, people start becoming a bit more normal when they talk to each other. So carry on talking to each other, and you've got people. You've also got, with your climate, although when I got off the plane last night, I was quite surprised, you're more outdoorsy. Now, you can't create a dementia-friendly community that easily in a country where 11 months a year we're sitting inside, sheltering from the rain, worrying about the gas bill, The fact is, you guys are outside more, and that gives you another automatic advantage in terms of creating dementia-friendly communities. When we're thinking about resources, by the way, I'm going to speed up now. If you're an organisation, again, and you're thinking about, what do we need to be doing to provide our services in a way that supports dementia-friendly communities? Early diagnosis. I don't need to labour that. I mean, you all know what the issues are. The earlier the diagnosis, the better. It means people can stay engaged. If people get their diagnosis too late, it's too late. Now, in terms of other services, people with dementia tell us that two things make a massive difference. One-to-one support. So in other words, support from a volunteer, perhaps, who shares your specific interests. I would imagine there are as many interests in this room as there are people in this room. So why is it that we take everyone over the age of 50 who's got dementia, we sit them in one big room and we make them listen to Vera Lynn? What is that all about? I'm 52. I came of my musical age during punk. So I want to listen to the Clash and the Sex Pistols, thank you. Not Vera Lynn. I don't get that. Anyway, one-to-one support, really effective, and it doesn't need to be incredibly expensive either. And again, if we've got dementia-friendly communities and your mates don't bugger off as soon as you get a diagnosis, that's the best kind of one-to-one support. Hey Steve, want to come diving? Damn right I do. We need to think about post-diagnostic support. How do we support people with dementia in a way that encourages and supports them to build a vision for a good life? Because here's how it goes generally in the UK, right? I'm a GP. Right? I'm terribly sorry that, to tell you you've got the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Here's a depressing leaflet about Alzheimer's. Come back when there's a problem. Sound familiar? Right? You get home with your leaflet, you read about disease, you read about decay, death, destruction, depression, and lots of other stuff beginning with D. Where is the message about living well there? Now, our national dementia strategy is called Living Well with Dementia. You can read that strategy 12 times and not find anything that will help people with dementia to live well. So we need to be supporting people with dementia in a way that gives them a sense of hope. And what better way than introducing them to other people with dementia who are living well? People like Graham, people like Kate Swaffer. Inspirational. And so many people with dementia have said to me that the thing that really changed my perception was being with other people with dementia who I could see were living well. Even people with more advanced dementia that were living well, that were living with a sense of positivity and agency. Quick note to the politicos, don't let dementia-friendly communities become a smokescreen behind which essential specialist services are cut. It's happening in the UK. And finally, at the heart and the start of the process of developing your dementia-friendly communities must be people with dementia and their carers. Again, because if they're not, you will fail. Why do we do this? Why do we talk to people? Because people have a right to a say. Because others will take your lead. It gives you somewhere to start. It helps people to think to themselves, you know what, I still matter. Because we know that one of the things that happens when you get your diagnosis is the cotton wool comes down for all the right caring reasons. But people with dementia said to us, I'm not dying of dementia, I'm suffocating because I'm smothered in cotton wool. And for people with dementia to have that sense of actually what I say matters. What Graham was saying on that video is having an impact, a massive impact, all across Australia, and I'll be taking it back to the UK with me. Ripples in the pond. That sense of agency is so important to people. And if dementia friendly means anything, it must mean involving people. And if we do that, then maybe, just maybe, we can create communities in which it's good to live with dementia, and in which a diagnosis of dementia might be life-changing, but need not be life-ending. Thanks very much.
Steve, there were 4 words that you used that really struck home to me what you were trying to convey. 2 of them were care and compassion, and the other was spark of humanity. And it struck me, and I'm going to be a little personal when I talk about this, but it struck me that for those of us that have or are now having to deal with one of our loved ones who is living with dementia, the issue of care and compassion, the issue of that spark of humanity is so important. It's something that ought to be imprinted across our minds. You see, I don't want to see happen again to anyone that I know, to anyone in this world, in this room, to people out there that are caring for their loved ones that are living with dementia. I don't want to see what happened to Mum when just a few months after she was diagnosed with dementia, her friends started to leave her alone and to put her into a position of total isolation. They couldn't understand that she was a living person, a person who had actually been a leader in the community, who still needed the friendship and the companionship, the care and compassion. I don't want to see again a position where my brother, Neil, who chairs Alzheimer Australia Vic, takes Mum down to the aged care centre. And as he walks her in, she turns to him and she says, Neil, I know what you're doing to me. She said, there will be a death in the family, it'll be on your hands. I don't want to see again a situation where in that aged care centre that is supposed to be so expert in dealing with people who are growing old and in some cases have dementia, not be able to deal with a situation where 2 people who had earlier befriended themselves with Mum mocked her because she carried a handbag everywhere she went, particularly when she got up of a morning in her dressing gown. It wasn't the people at the centre that pulled them into line. It was one of my brothers who said, "You must understand, my mother has dementia. Please show some care and some compassion," that spark of humanity. And I guess I don't ever want to see again the situation where we went down there one day to join her for eating. She was on her own because those friends that didn't have dementia had simply said they didn't want to sit with her ever again, and she was left in isolation. So that's care and compassion. It's the spark of humanity. And Steve, that's what you've talked about. For those that have the time and can make the effort, I invite you so much to go down and see the virtual dementia experience at Oak Street, Parkville. It will show you what it is when you have a loved one that has dementia and the sort of experiences that they have when they're occupying their normal area of living, their home. It's an experience that we never understood at the time, and had we understood it, we'd have done so much to try and help Mum stay at home. So Steve, what you've talked about, dementia-friendly or communities that have got that care and compassion, that spark of humanity, frankly, to us, to my brothers and I, means so much. And we only wish we'd known it at the time all those years ago. But hopefully you've assisted those that are present here today to actually understand what care and compassion, that spark of humanity, is all about. Please join me in thanking Steve for his most insightful.
Thank you. Thank you.